Hello, world literature students. Today we're here to talk about literary elements or literary terms used in Taming of the Shrew. It is important that you fully understand these literary elements because you'll be referencing them in discussions that we have throughout the year. You'll be referencing them in the reading quizzes that we give you to take every cycle assessment, and you will also be referencing them in your analytical essays that you write at the end of the quarter. So the sooner you get familiar with them, the better it's going to go for you in class. So let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about a handful of literary terms. The first is characterization, setting, followed by author's purpose, theme, internal and external conflict, tone, and mood. For each of these literary terms, I'm going to be providing you with a definition, a textual example from Taming of the Shrew, an explanation of that textual example, and an image to really help you remember what the literary term is. What you should be doing during this time is you should be taking notes on your literary terms cheat sheet. You'll be expected to take notes on the definition, on the textual example, and on the image that is given to you. Remember to take good notes as you can use this cheat sheet during your assessment exam tomorrow. So the first literary term we have is characterization. Characterization is how the author portrays or describes a character through the use of descriptions of that character's action, speech, dress, etc. So maybe the way other characters see them would be another thing to add here. Portrays, again, just means to describe a character. And through those descriptions of that character, we as readers get a sense of who that character is. Let me give you an example. At the beginning of the play, in Act 1, Scene 1, we meet Baptista and his two daughters, Catherine and Bianca. Catherine is the one speaking here in this quotation that you see. She has just been insulted and called essentially a whore, a prostitute, by Bianca's suitors. And so, in response, she threatens to use violence against one of the suitors, as you can see here. Through that comment, we can use the adjectives. Remember, when you characterize a character, you use adjectives. We can use the adjectives aggressive, intense, violent, and angry to characterize Catherine in this scene. And just to help you get that embedded in your head, here's an image of Catherine not exactly being too happy with another character in the play. Now, let's talk about setting. Setting is the time, place, and circumstances under which an event occurs. So, in the play, we get an example of setting right from the beginning when Lucentio arrives to Padua. And he is the first character that we hear speak, and he's speaking to his servant Tranio. And here you see that he mentions fair Padua, nursery of the arts. Through that description of the setting, I know that Padua must be a cultured place if it really focuses on the arts and letters and studying. In fact, Lucentio is there to study. And here is an image of a university in Padua. And so you can see that based on Lucentio's description, I get a specific image of the setting in which this play occurs. Now let's talk about author's purpose. Author's purpose refers to the author's overall message or argument within a piece of literature. It tells the author's overall objective. So people write for very specific reasons. They don't just write to write. They write to entertain, to call for action, to educate, to open people's minds to a new way of thinking. There are a variety of reasons why people write. So let's look at how Shakespeare wrote and how we can tell what his purpose was in the way that he had characters speak. So here's an example again from Act 1, Scene 1. And this is a little bit after Catherine has threatened Bianca's suitors with a stool. Here we hear Bianca's voice for the first time. And in it, you hear her addressing both her sister and her father, who she refers to as Sir. Catherine, it should be noted, right before this statement, has insulted her sister and has essentially called her a brat. And you see here Bianca's response. She says to her sister, "Sister, content you in my discontent." And to her dad, "Sir, to your pleasure I humbly subscribe." Essentially, she's not reacting in any way similarly to Catherine. Here, Shakespeare purposefully had Bianca say these nice things to her dad and kind of push away or ignore her sister's disrespect so that we can contrast her to her shrewish sister. So here you see a picture of Bianca, and there you see her books and her instrument, which is what she should be focused on, and not on Catherine, who is being shrewish. That brings us now to theme. Theme is a broad and universal idea. It's a message or moral of the story. And the most important part of a theme is you know something is a theme is if it can relate across time and cultures. It should be, again, universal, something that we can all relate to. Let me give you an example. When Lucentio, at the end of Act 1, Scene 1, has fallen helplessly in love with Bianca, he turns to Tranio and he says, Tranio, I burn, I pine, I perish. Tranio, if I achieve not this young, modest girl. Through this, we can see that for Lucentio, love right now feels like it's elusive, it's hard to get. So here we have the theme of love being elusive, which drives people sometimes to lying or to putting on a disguise to get what they want and to escape social conventions. So here's an image to represent that theme. Somebody chasing after love, but having kind of a hard time. Love being elusive. Now, our first type of conflict. You have the first type of conflict is internal conflict. It's a character's conflict with himself. The way that I think about it is internal. It's essentially like inside. So the conflict is inside of a person. There are no other people or characters present within this conflict. An example of this in the text happens at the end of Act 3, Scene 2, when Hortensio, dressed as a tutor, has realized that Bianca is being wooed by Lucentio, who is also dressed as a tutor. So up until this point, he has been very much in love with Bianca. But he's conflicted about her liking somebody else. And he's kind of debating with himself here if it's even worth it to stay and fight for her love if she's just going to let her eyes wander and look at other people. So here's an image of internal conflict. Again, it's an individual conflict, a conflict within the inside of a person. So you see here that there's nobody else present when this conflict arises. This is in contrast to external conflict. An external conflict is a character's conflict with either another character or group within the story. There are tons of examples of external conflict in Taming of the Shrew. One appears right at the beginning, again in Act 1, Scene 1, when Baptista is stating to Bianca's suitors that they are not allowed to court Bianca, much less marry her, until Catherine herself has a suitor. Gremio, one of the suitors that she later threatens, essentially insults Catherine and says nobody's going to want Catherine. She's a prostitute. So here when he says to cart her rather, he's implying that she's a prostitute. Catherine at that point responds not to Gremio, but to her dad. And she calls him out on letting Gremio say this. So you see the contrast between these two comments. And they show the conflict between father and daughter. So here's an image to help you think about this. An external conflict happens between two or more people. And there's usually some discontent or argument involved. All right, that brings us now to tone. Tone suggests an attitude towards the subject which is communicated by the words the author chooses. The key word here is that tone is through the author's point of view. This is better explained through an example. Here is a scene where Catherine and Petruchio first meet. And Petruchio is kind of going off. And Catherine says to him, where did you study this goodly speech? So like, where did you come up with all these remarks? And he says, it's extempore from my mother wit. So he's saying, it's kind of natural. I'm a natural witty person. And she says, a witty mother, making fun of the fact that he says mother wit. Witless else her son, essentially saying, yeah, well, too bad her son isn't all that funny. Okay, so this comes from Act 2, Scene 1. And here, you see that the insults between the two characters establish kind of a witty, fast-paced tone. So Shakespeare had Catherine and Petruchio go at each other with insults purposefully. He was trying to communicate that these characters are witty and they can kind of keep up with each other. Tone is very similar to mood. And in fact, oh, before I get to that, I apologize. This is the image here. So you see that it is through the author's point of view. So the person who is writing, hence this image. As I was saying, tone is sometimes confused with mood. Mood is a description of how the reader feels when reading the story. So, whereas tone is from the author's point of view, mood is from the reader's point of view. So, if we look at that same scene again, Catherine insulting Petruchio's comments, Petruchio responding that he's naturally witty, and Catherine essentially making a modern your mama joke, you will see that the reader, in reading this scene, feels entertained. You feel like the two characters have found their match. That is the mood that it creates. It's an entertaining mood. And so the mood here is again through the reader's point of view. So here you have the reader having reactions to what he or she is reading. I hope that this has helped you understand literary terms. Remember to take good notes on this screencast, as again, you will be allowed to use them during the Assessment 3 cycle exam. Have a good night.